Hi, this is Jim Steinmeyer, the executive editor of Genii magazine. On behalf of our staff of talented writers and editors, columnists, I want to welcome you to the June 2025 issue of Genii. Summer starting, and we've put together an amazing way to start the summer with an amazing collection of articles on magic, magic tricks, routines, and insights for all of you. It's a great issue. Let me start with it this way. If you were thinking of taking a big step in your career, if you were contemplating putting together your own show, not just a magic act, but your own theater show, and you were wondering how to do it, you might be surprised to get a phone call from a good friend of yours. Now imagine with me. And that person says, I want to invite you to lunch with a few friends of mine. And those friends are a Disney writer and director who's produced magic on stage, a Disney creative director who's well known for her theater work in New York City, and she's famous for her immersive theater work, which is setting trends now across the world, and a Broadway producer who studies the marketplace and has been involved in many of the most successful shows on Broadway in the last few years. Would you like to have lunch with them? You might think that your ship had come in and that you now were in for the most amazing lunch you've ever encountered. And that's a little about what's happening in this article this month in Genii magazine. We've put together a roundtable of wonderful theater professionals to talk about the idea of magic as a theatrical art, and notably the challenges behind putting together a one-person show centered around the art of magic and utilizing the skills of a magician. It is a great staff of people: Benjamin Schrader, Jenny Weinblum, and Alexander Marshall. Alexander Marshall, you might know as Sandy Marshall, Jay Marshall's son, who's a Broadway producer. And all of them are familiar with magic. All of them have been involved in related arts, and all of them have a lot to say about the theater. We think you'll enjoy this roundtable. I got to chair it, and I know I enjoyed it. It really was exactly like I described, like sitting down with friends and talking about a creative exercise, and we think you'll be inspired by it. So if you want to take it a little easier, you might want to think about another form of theater. You might have seen deaf interpreters, ASL interpreters interpreting for deaf audiences in theater shows. It's interesting that it happens in theater shows and it happens at magic shows. And Chloe Olewitz has written an amazing article talking to the deaf magicians that are involved in this, the interpreters who interpret for ASL, American Sign Language, what that process is and what the challenges are. I'm going to talk about that a little more in a couple minutes. But please take a look at that article, because I think you'll be fascinated at how it looks at magic through this interesting little keyhole of this point of view of how these people are working to put magic in front of new audiences. Or you might just want to sit back and read a review of one of the most amazing mystery shows that will be produced this year. Darren Brown's new show is called Only Human. It's just opened in the UK. Craig Mitchell has given us a kind of sneak peek review as it's nearing London and circling around cities around London. And you'll be amazed to read about how Darren is now surprising his audiences. Just a few little tips. One of the things that happens when you edit a magazine is that you're involved in the articles a lot. You read the articles a lot. And so you really get to appreciate them, and you get to appreciate the writers. So I seldom walk away from an issue with one favorite article or two favorite articles. They really all become friends of mine. The writers become friends, and the articles become really interesting. But I'm going to try to call out a few that I don't want you to miss, because I know Genii sits on a coffee table and you get a chance to read it. But I don't want you to overlook some of the features, because they really are amazing points of view this month. One of them is from Paul Gertner, a kind of special guest editorial, who writes about a new kind of magic. I think it's something you really need to read. You'll be surprised by it. And I think it's something you're going to talk to other magicians about as well, especially young magicians that you might know. Peter Lamont from Edinburgh writes a great piece about the perspectives of magic. We've talked about changing the frame and changing the magic. He really defines what that process is and how we all have that creative exercise right at our fingertips, and how we can reinterpret our magic for audiences in a new way. There's a great feature on the Chicago Magic Lounge, a place that you've heard about. Maybe some of you have visited. Vanessa Armstrong takes you on a great tour of it and describes their business and what's successful there. And in the marketplace, there's a really interesting article about a magic shop called White Rabbit Magic. You probably haven't heard about it. It's a shop kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they like it that way. They'll tell you all about it, and you'll get a chance to visit White Magic Rabbit. And I hope maybe you do have a chance to visit White Rabbit Magic. Um, our columnists, Pete McCabe writes about the importance of choosing the right opening words when writing your patter. That sounds like an obvious thing to say, but he has really interesting insights into it. Don't miss that. Sarah Krasson talks about working restaurants and did it by assembling another team of professionals, two professionals who discuss with her the ins and outs of that business and what to look out for as you put that business together. We have great magic brought to us by Noah Levine, great Magicana column by Richard Kaufman. Roberto Mancilla teaches his long-time dictionary test, one of his great effects from his routine that he's been using over the years. Of course, he has all of those subtle touches with it, and he describes them. And when we talk about subtle touches, please take some time and look at Adam Elbaum's magnificent description of a trick called the king thing, which is a variation of the queen thing. Very simple little routine, which of course, simple in its appearance, it's filled with beautiful little touches that he's worked out over years and years and years of performance with it. It's really an education in this kind of thinking, and we know that you'll enjoy it. Okay, Genii Speak. When I write about it in the magazine, I end up talking about Chloe Olewitz, who wrote the article on American Sign Language, and I ended up talking to her about it. Not only that, but other articles that she's written, articles she's written over the last few years for Genii, and looking ahead to what she'll be doing next month, and theoretically what she'll be doing months and months from now. You've been reading her articles for years and enjoying them. I want you to get a chance to meet her. You might have met her sitting in the Genii booth or saying hello, but she has a lot to say, and she has a really interesting insight into our art. So please take a look at the video and the interview with Chloe Olewitz, and we'll see you all next month in July. Thanks. I'm here with Chloe Olewitz, and that is a name that all of you Genii readers should know. You do know it, even if you haven't been paying attention to bylines. You see it on our masthead every month, but you've been reading her work for the last, how many years? Over a dozen years, right?
Oh, maybe 5 or 6.
Oh, 5 or 6. I mean, she started very early with the eye. She's been writing features for Genii. She was writing features for Richard Kaufman. A lot of the features that you've been reading, the profiles, have been written by Chloe. And she's now our editor at large. She's an integral part in the magazine. She has a lot of editor duties behind the scenes, working with columnists and working on articles. But you know her primarily for her articles. There's a great one in the June issue, and which you're going to see, and one coming up in July. And I think notably, she started talking about in our very first issue, the new issues in February, she started with a great piece called What Is This Magazine? Which was kind of an amazing piece, looking backwards and forwards at the same time. It's very hard to do that. And it was a kind of call to arms for us, and also a recognition of what Genii has been in the past. But it was interesting because she did it all through a really personal point of view about growing up and finding a stack of Genii magazines in her father's trunk of magic tricks. So, Chloe, thank you very much for being here. And let me ask you about that stack of magazines and what that meant and what that looked like to you as a little girl.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was 4 or 5, it was fun. It was a way to connect with my dad and my dad's story. He grew up in born and raised Brooklyn boy, who was on Coney Island with the people that I was reading about. Like, it was a very exciting thing. I got into magic and then out. And I think because I found that stack of magazines in that trunk of stuff, trunk of gems, I understood that it was more than just a trick very early on. There was history here, there was narrative, this was impacting some kind of community that I could imagine even as a little kid. And that was really juicy for me.
I think back, I also discovered a stack of magazines when I was a kid from my older brother. And I think back of how kind of mysterious that world was. Because it was like it was like firing on all cylinders. All these people were writing this really exciting stuff. It was the most exciting thing about, what was happening. But it was so weird and mysterious what they were discussing. Even if you knew about magic tricks, it was weird and mysterious because the obsessions of magicians are all kind of sideways. Um,
Yeah, I think it's the same now, right? I think if you find a genie now and you are just maybe not 4 or 5, but just
right,
getting started, you are just thrown in the deep end. Maybe if you pick up February 2025, you get a little bit of an on-ramp, but
right.
otherwise you find yourself immersed in a world that was otherwise mysterious.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool experience for anybody, whether it's a little kid or somebody who's really getting into a new skill, hobby, art form, whatever.
Yeah. I think we are okay at talking about magic culturally. We're able to do it a little bit in retrospect. I don't know that we're even great at that. I find big holes in the history, but I think we don't do it really well with current events. We don't get the connections between magic and popular culture, and I know that that's been kind of your charge and your interest in this world. Um, and I think that what you've done is you've taken on some of these challenging stories. We've been scratching our heads over, how much do we talk about this? How much do we acknowledge this? And what can we look to in the terms of the future and the present of magic?
Yeah.
So I think that's a real cultural challenge that
Yeah.
we're really not good at.
I think there's a very clear line between the conversations magicians have with magicians and the conversation the magicians have with other people. And I think that is by its nature and by design. Um, that's not all about the secrets.
Right.
A lot of it is about, like you said, I think this question of culture, I think in a lot of artistic communities, you see people, you can get so insular about it, about anything, that you kind of forget that there's a whole world out there happening.
Right.
And that you are a part of it, and the art form that you love is a part of it, and the artistic community that you may be embroiled in the day-to-day drama with is a part of the broader culture. Um, whether it's a magazine like what we've been doing with Genii, or a website or a new project or a new development or whatever it is, um, there are people doing things out in the world that rhyme with what we're doing or what that artistic group is doing. And
Right.
I think being in conversation with those things is important. Um, other artistic communities are evolving and changing and growing in technology and Bluetooth and the rest, just as we are. Um, and we can get so sort of focused on what has happened in magic so far, or the first of this or the first of that, that we kind of lose the bird's eye view of how this fits into the world that we inhabit and how we influence the world around us.
Yeah. No, that's really well put. I think there's an aspect of magic. There's always been an aspect where, the best stuff is the old stuff. The best stuff is if we could just like claw our way back to vaudeville, we'd be okay again.
I mean, I think that's part of why this story came out the way it did. That what is this magazine feature?
Right.
There's so much history to Genii magazine, and a lot of it is really interesting. The twists and turns and why things unfolded the way they did. Um, but there is good there and there is good here. I think um, placing what we're doing now in its longer timeline of what we've done over the years and why, and what we're doing now and why, was really important because of that.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that if you just were rational about it, you would say that an art form that's about talking about supernatural like things and special powers and special abilities um, would be really culturally significant.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
have a lot to say about what's happening day to day for audiences. And yet I think we assiduously avoid that in a kind of purist sense. Uh,
Yeah. I think a lot of people, but for me, it can be really hard day to day to be like in the details of making this magazine about magic, like look outside the window. The world, there's a lot going on in the world.
right.
And at the same time, like this is the time for art, and this is the time to care about what we're making and what we're putting out there, and care about how we do it.
Yeah. Yeah. What sort of performers excite you? What do you see that you think about? I mean, obviously, I would say, what do you think about for story inspiration? But even besides that, that makes you appreciate magic more.
Yeah, I mean, I think um, I'm always looking for something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Mhm.
I don't think there's a specific style or a specific approach that I'm hooked on. I mean, everyone has their own personal taste, no problem. I think there's a kind of transcendence that happens when someone's building something, a show, an act, a project, whatever it is. I think it happens, that transcendence happens more when it's being done with integrity.
Right.
Um, I kind of can smell it. I don't know how to
Right.
tell you what I'm looking for.
Right.
But I think in terms of stories for the magazine, I started doing 6,000 word cover stories when I started writing with Richard, and it was a great opportunity, and I was thrilled to do it. And I think there's a lot to be said for toning it down a little bit, for looking for a story there's a reason we're talking about this right now, for focusing with an angle, um, with a hook on what it is about this person that we really want to learn from or get to know or brush up against, instead of what we have called the resume and the obituary, which is the entire record of every breath they've ever taken.
Right. Right. No, I mean those profiles are amazing, and at times, because they're really amazing characters in Magic, those profiles are deserved. But I think we just came from a editors meeting where we talked a little bit about this, and I think it's a really good point that those profile articles also can be news articles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we do magicians a disservice when we just put out a record of their lives. There's so much more than where they've been and where they were born and when they got their first magic kit.
Right.
Makes an artist who they are and makes their art what it is. And I think um, I was really excited about the opportunity to do some of that discretion. What do we really want to learn about this person? Which is often heartbreaking because it means a lot of fascinating stuff ends up on the cutting room
Right.
floor,
Right.
which is a whole other battle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean it's interesting, and it does invite really kind of narrow keyhole looks at something, which are deep dives. And there's one of those in the June issue, um, about and I say this, to readers who haven't encountered this yet, believe it or not, is about talking about the translators for American Sign Language and how magic gets translated in a live performance for a
Yeah.
deaf audience.
Interpreted.
Excuse me?
Interpreted.
Interpret it. You're
A
absolutely right.
distinction that we make.
No, it's really right. It's really right. It's very interesting, and that is part of this story, is that these are not just words getting slapped in front of people. This is a full language, a real language that is conveyed in certain ways with expressions and everything else. Talk a little about that. I mean, I know you had a lot of surprises in dealing with this and talking to people in this community.
Yeah, there are a lot of pieces to the story. I am not personally connected to the deaf community, and there is a thriving deaf community in this country and in other countries,
Mhm.
um, with its own culture and, like you said, its own language. One of the things we talk about in the piece is that a lot of people assume that American Sign Language is just um, translating word for word the words we speak in English onto hand symbols. And
Right,
that's just not the case.
right,
Um, in the piece, I sort of took the position that a lot of people don't understand, really, the intense and complex responsibility of live ASL interpretation. Everything that goes into it, um, on the spot and also with research in advance, it's an incredible task.
yeah,
Um, I think it's easy to extrapolate how this happens with other linguistic interpretation, spoken language to spoken language, for example. But this is a really specific one because it includes this physical component, multiple physical components, as we go over in the piece. That's not just um, movements with the hands and fingers. It's also about position. It's also about gesture. It's also about facial expression. They're like codified components of producing a sign that isn't just the shape you make with your hands.
Right.
Um, and all of this is happening in real time, sometimes to multiple deaf people in an audience. And that interpreter has to balance different styles, you can think of them as dialects, right? It's all happening so carefully and with such attention to a deaf audience member having a complete experience and a faithful experience of what's being said aloud on the stage. That the goal was really to give magicians a better understanding of what that's all like so that they can interact with and acknowledge ASL interpreters that appear at their shows, which they hopefully do more and more,
Right.
with more respect, with a better understanding, um, without so much shock about what that all is and how it all works.
Yeah, I think we've probably because it happens at magicians conventions because there are a lot of deaf magicians who come to conventions, and so I think we've probably seen that some of that live interpretation being done at the convention as we're sitting there.
Yeah.
But it is an amazing process to really read about it, about how that's all put together. And of course, part of it is that those interpreters are also leaving open the opportunities for them to be watching the magician at the same time
Yeah.
and watching the effect so that they're not lost in the middle of watching the language
Yeah.
that the visuals are part of that as well. And it's a really delicate dance. And like you say, it takes a lot of preparation ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's once you get into understanding everything that's happening, it's kind of astonishing that it ever happens without preparation because there's just so much to manage. And
Right.
like you said, with magic, there's a lot that can be done to sort of force the sight line of where a deaf audience member would be sitting, where the interpreter is positioned, and where the action is happening on stage. But even then, you can't look at two things at the same time, right? If you're speaking while you're doing magic, your audience members are either looking at your magic or looking at the interpreter.
Right.
So it's a lot to balance.
Right. And you talk a little bit about how much those people, you know, are part of the show, aren't part of the show, might mistakenly be dragged into the show, might, are trying to be inconspicuous. It's a really delicate dance because there are two simultaneous performances going on for certain people in that audience.
Yeah. I will say just flat out, I mean, I'm very clearly suggesting that we no longer um, say things just to have them signed by the interpreter without
Right.
discussing that with the interpreter in advance,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, it's a practice that happens not just with magicians, but with comedians. It happens all over the place, and the ask is that that not happen.
Yeah. It's interesting. Those interpreters really give a performance.
Yeah,
And I think that fools us. I would say to a casual audience member watching that, you think of them as performers.
yeah,
So you go, oh, there are two performers there. There's one standing at the edge of the stage and one on stage. And those people are not performers in that same sense. They are really tasked with a job.
yeah.
They might use performance skills as part of their job, but they have a very specific job, which is to convey what's going on that stage.
So
Uh,
I spoke to a number of deaf magicians and professional ASL interpreters. You get to meet four of them in the
right,
story. But in addition to what you're saying, that to the hearing audience, the ASL interpreter might look like they're putting on a show.
yeah,
There's also a real moment for a magician who wasn't aware that was going to be happening, who's
right,
on stage, who suddenly notices there's another person, maybe specially lit, maybe also standing,
yeah,
and might just be in riffing mode and think that it's a great thing to do. And
absolutely, yeah,
I think the interpreters that I spoke to, most of the interpreters I spoke to for this story, um, had a lot of grace for the misunderstanding that happens that, they're in performance mode. It looks like you're a performer, like it's actually kind
Right,
of an invitation in that mindset. But it doesn't always play out that way.
right, right. And in the course of it, you spoke to deaf magicians, which is another amazing culture and a really long-standing group. I mean, I know you talked to Simon Carmel,
Yeah.
and you know, um, who has written books about biographies about deaf magicians, but also, uh, that whole community. There's a great tradition of that, and there are performers. Those are often the people that will go to a magic show and watch other magicians, and will be using ASL interpreters. So it's a really interesting subject of this group within our group and how that changes the way we perceive what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hope it helps some people understand something that they may not have been aware of before.
Yeah, no, it's a really,
And how
really
it'll make,
interesting story that I think,
better performers.
yeah, yes, absolutely. And for July, just want to say, you got another feature coming up.
Yeah, it's a very short little thing. We have a few pieces that are on about around Penn Teller.
Right.
And this will be a little bit from behind the scenes at Fool Us and sort of what has been running that machine for 11 seasons now.
Wow. Yeah.
And how, in my opinion, that's had a huge impact on how magic is having a moment in the culture right now, the broader
Yeah.
culture.
No, it's a great story, and it's their 50th anniversary this year, and I think we're doing it from two endpoints. The beginning of their career, and then talking about Fool Us and how that all works and how it all comes together and ends up being the show that you see today. So that's great. I appreciate your insider's view of that.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. Like, got to speak to some interesting people and again, pulling back the curtain a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your continued work on this. Please, everybody, when you see that byline in the magazine, you know who it is now. You kind of understand where she's coming from. And I know that she's got some surprising stories in the works as well. So please keep watching for those. We'll
Thanks,
see you
Jim.
next month in July. Thanks.